The hardest lesson I ever had to teach wasn't about the laws of thermodynamics or how to calibrate a robotic arm, but about what happens when a guest decides they are the master of your sanctuary. Hey everyone, before we get deep into this story, let me know in the comments down below, what city or country are you listening from? I love seeing where you all are tuning in from and building our community. Anyway, let's get back to what happened. My name is Helen. I spent 35 years of my life teaching high school physics, and when I retired, I didn't stop teaching. I simply moved my classroom to the massive, custom-built workshop attached to my property. My late husband, Thomas, built that workshop with his own 2 hands. We poured the concrete foundation together. He sanded the oak workbenches until they were smooth as glass. For the last 10 years, that workshop has been home to the county's premier youth robotics club. I spend my afternoons mentoring brilliant, underprivileged kids, helping them build machines that win national competitions. My home, a rambling, lived-in property filled with blueprints, soldering irons, and warmth, was a haven. Then my son Leo and his wife Clara moved in. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. Leo had poured his life savings into a tech startup that went under, and Clara, a high-end corporate consultant who valued aesthetics over absolutely everything else, had lost her luxury downtown apartment lease. When Leo called me, his voice heavy with defeat, asking if they could stay in the guest wing for a few months to get back on their feet, I didn't hesitate. You never hesitate when your child needs you. I told him the doors were always open. I cleared out the spare bedrooms, bought their favorite groceries, and welcomed them with a hot meal. At first, it felt nice having the house full of life again, outside of my club hours. But the erosion of my peace did not happen all at once. It started with small, surgical strikes, disguised as helpfulness. I came downstairs one morning to find all my vintage, mismatched coffee mugs, the ones my students had given me over 3 decades, boxed up by the back door. In their place were identical, sterile, double-walled glass cups that burned your fingers if you held them too tight. When I asked Clara about it, she was wiping down the granite counter with a microfiber cloth. She did not stop wiping as she spoke. She just smiled, that polished, empty smile, and said, "Helen, those old cups were chipped and harboring bacteria. I thought I would upgrade us to something a bit more modern. You deserve nice things." The way she said it made me feel like an ancient relic that needed dusting. I swallowed my pride and said nothing. I told myself she was just trying to contribute. I told myself it was just coffee cups. But temporary has a way of stretching out, and boundaries have a way of blurring when you do not defend them. 2 weeks later, the war moved from the kitchen to the living room. Thomas and I had a beautiful, oversized, slightly worn leather armchair right by the fireplace. It was where I sat every evening to review my students' blueprints. One Tuesday, I came back from a robotics competition in the city to find the chair gone. In its place was a rigid, geometric, beige linen sofa that looked like it belonged in a dentist's waiting room. I found my leather chair shoved into the damp corner of the basement. When I confronted Clara, she let out a soft, patronizing laugh. "Oh, Helen," she sighed, as if explaining something very simple to a toddler. That bulky old thing was ruining the spatial flow of the room. I have a few colleagues coming over for a strategy meeting this weekend, and I needed the space to look professional. I didn't want them thinking we lived in a thrift store. My son Leo just stood in the hallway, looking at his shoes. He mumbled something about Clara having a sharp eye for design. He was exhausted from his failed business, avoiding conflict at all costs, acting as a buffer that only absorbed my dignity. I let it go again. I retreated to my workshop, the one place she hadn't touched. The workshop was my heart. 3 days a week, 10 teenagers would pile in, dropping their backpacks, firing up the soldering irons, and laughing over plates of cookies I baked for them. It was loud, chaotic, and beautiful. Clara hated it. She started parking her massive luxury SUV diagonally across the driveway, making it impossible for the parents to drop off their kids. When I asked her to move it, she would say she was in the middle of a very important Zoom call and couldn't possibly be disturbed. Then came the incident with the power server. My students were running a complex 48-hour simulation for their competition robot. The computer tower was humming away in the corner of the workshop. One afternoon, I walked in and found the screens black. The simulation was dead. I traced the cord to the wall and found it unplugged. Plugged into the outlet was a sleek, expensive, high-tech indoor exercise bike. Clara was in the house, sipping a green smoothie. When I asked her why she unplugged the server, she didn't even blink. "Oh, I needed to get my spin workout in, Helen. The Wi-Fi signal for the bike's screen is only strong enough in the workshop. The kids can just restart their little video game later, right?" "It's not a video game, Clara," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I was desperately trying to suppress. "It is months of hard work. You destroyed their data." She rolled her eyes just slightly. "Let's not be melodramatic, Helen. It's just a hobby club. I have actual corporate wellness goals to maintain." That was the moment the cold reality set in. She did not respect me. She did not respect my work, my home, or my life. I was just the landlord of the hotel she was trying to renovate. But the breaking point, the moment that shattered the fragile glass house we were living in, happened a month later. It was the eve of the Regional Robotics Championship. It was a tradition for me to host a dinner for the club's sponsors, the parent volunteers, and the senior students. I had been planning it for weeks. I bought groceries, cleaned the house, and prepared a massive pot roast, just like I did every year. Clara had been buzzing around the house all day, bringing in expensive floral arrangements and shifting my furniture around. I assumed she was just being her usual controlling self. By 7 o'clock, the dining room was full. The sponsors were chatting, the parents were laughing, and the house felt alive. I was in the kitchen, carefully transferring a fresh batch of chocolate chip cookies onto a silver tray. The tray Thomas had bought for our 10th anniversary. I smoothed down my practical denim apron, took a deep breath, and pushed through the swinging door into the dining room. Clara was standing at the head of my table. She was wearing a tailored beige silk blouse, holding a glass of wine, and commanding the room. She was telling a story to the mayor, who was one of our biggest sponsors, taking credit for organizing the entire event. I stepped forward, holding the tray of cookies, trying to offer them to a guest. Clara turned. She looked at me, looked at my apron, and then looked at the tray. The room was loud, but her voice was perfectly pitched. It cut through the chatter like a surgical scalpel. "I didn't invite you to this part of the evening, Helen." For a second, my brain refused to process the words. The tray rattled against my wedding ring. I looked around. The mayor paused mid-sip. A parent volunteer froze. Leo was sitting 3 chairs down. His knuckles were white as he gripped his napkin, but his eyes were fixed entirely on his plate. He said nothing. He did absolutely nothing. I looked at the oak table I had bought 20 years ago. I looked at the floorboards I had polished. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who was giving me a tight, polite smile, the kind of smile you give the hired help when they overstep their bounds. "I didn't invite you," she repeated, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "The adults are having a networking discussion. Why don't you take those lovely little snacks out to the workshop with the children?" The silence in the room was deafening. It felt as though all the air had been sucked out through the chimney. My face burned. My heart pounded so fiercely against my ribs I thought it might crack them. I could have screamed. I could have made a scene and reminded everyone whose roof they were sitting under. But the humiliation was so heavy, it paralyzed me. I slowly lowered the tray onto the side buffet. I didn't say a word. I turned around, walked through the kitchen, and stepped out the back door into the cool night air. I walked across the dark yard and let myself into the workshop. I turned on the single desk lamp. The smell of metal, sawdust, and ozone filled my lungs. I sat down in my old chair, surrounded by the half-built robots and the scattered blueprints, and for the first time since my husband died, I wept. I wept because I realized my son had traded his voice for peace with a tyrant, and I had traded my home for the illusion of family. The next morning, the house was suffocatingly quiet. I woke up early, before the sun had even fully risen. I made coffee in one of her horrible glass cups and sat at the kitchen island. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt something much more dangerous. I felt clear, absolute, crystalline clarity. I went to the old wooden filing cabinet in my study. I pulled out a heavy, cream-colored folder. Inside was the deed to the property. Sole ownership. Helen Margaret Vance. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting in the office of Margaret, my fellow robotics mentor and a retired property lawyer. I told her everything. I told her about the coffee cups, the sofa, the server, and the dinner. Margaret listened, her hands folded on her desk. When I finished, she didn't offer pity. She offered a battle plan. "You don't negotiate with invaders, Helen," she said firmly. "You are allowing her to treat you like a tenant in your own kingdom. It stops today." She drafted a formal list of residency requirements and boundaries. I drove home with the papers resting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. When I walked into the house, Clara was in the living room, directing 2 men in overalls who were carrying large rolls of soundproofing foam. Leo was standing near the stairs, looking panicked. "Mom," Leo said, stepping forward, "Clara is she's having some contractors look at the workshop." Clara turned, looking mildly annoyed by my presence. "Oh, Helen, good, you're here. We need to talk about the barn. I've decided to convert it into a private yoga studio and maybe an Airbnb rental. The robotics club is a massive liability, and frankly, the noise is terrible for my focus. I'm sure the kids can find some public library to play in. The sheer audacity of it hung in the air. She hadn't even asked. She was just taking. The contractors looked awkwardly between us. I walked past Leo. I walked right up to Clara. I held out the papers Margaret had drafted. "I am not negotiating with you, Clara," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I don't care about your focus. I don't care about your wellness goals. This is my house. This is my property. That workshop belongs to my students. The contractors," I said, turning to the men, "can leave immediately." Clara's face flushed red. She crossed her arms, her polished demeanor cracking. "You are being completely unreasonable, Helen. We are family. We are trying to maximize the value of this property. You are hoarding all this space for a bunch of neighborhood brats when we are trying to build a future." I looked her dead in the eye. "You are not building a future. You are stealing mine. And as of this moment, you have exactly 30 days to find a new place to live. The eviction notice is on the second page." Clara literally gasped. She looked at Leo, expecting him to jump to her defense, expecting him to shield her like he always did. Leo opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Leo, I love you, but you have let this woman disrespect your father's memory, my life's work, and my dignity. You can leave with her, or you can stay and figure out how to be a man again. But she is done here." Clara screamed. She called me selfish. She called me crazy. She threw the papers onto the floor and stormed upstairs. The sound of her expensive heels clicking angrily against the wood echoed through the house. The contractors quietly packed up their foam and scurried out the front door. Leo stood in the hallway, looking at the crumpled eviction notice on the rug. He didn't follow her up the stairs. He just stood there, the realization of what he had allowed to happen finally washing over him. The next 30 days were a cold war. Clara refused to speak to me. She packed her minimalist beige clothes and her expensive cookware in aggressive silence. She tried to convince Leo to fight the eviction, but for the first time in their marriage, he said no. When the moving truck finally pulled out of the driveway, Clara didn't even look back. Leo didn't go with her. He moved his few bags into the small room above the garage. He told me they were separating. He looked completely broken. But as the weeks went on, I saw a change in him. One Tuesday afternoon, I was in the workshop trying to help a student solder a tricky circuit board. My hands were shaking a bit. My eyesight isn't what it used to be. Suddenly, a pair of steady hands reached over and took the soldering iron. It was Leo. He sat down on a stool, adjusted his safety glasses, and showed the kid how to lay a perfect bead of metal. I watched my son, the boy who grew up in this very room, finally come back to life. The house is mine again. The vintage mugs are back in the cupboards. The leather chair is back by the fireplace. The workshop is louder than ever. I learned that true hospitality doesn't mean giving away your power. It means knowing exactly where your boundaries are and never, ever letting anyone blow past them. So that's my story. It was a painful journey, but it saved my sanity and my life's work. Do you think I was too harsh, kicking my daughter-in-law out? Or did I do the right thing to protect my home and my students? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.